All right, let's dive into a story that is just fascinating. It's where ancient history, a 1,400-year-old religious text, and some seriously modern satellite geology all crash into each other in a way you would just never expect.
So, picture this. What if a book, written way back in the 7th century, described a famous historical battle, but tucked inside that description was a tiny geographical detail, a detail so specific, so incredibly precise, that it was literally impossible to verify until we had satellites mapping our planet from space. The text we're talking about is from the Quran, from a chapter called Surah Ar-Rum. It talks about the defeat of the Byzantine Romans by the Persian Empire, and it says it happened in a place called Adna al-Ard. Now remember that phrase, because those two words, they're the key to this entire puzzle. Okay, so to really get why this is such a big deal, we've got to rewind the clock. We're going back to the early 7th century. You've got two global superpowers, the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire and the Sasanian Persian Empire, and they are just locked in this brutal, world-changing war.
This conflict was absolutely epic, and around the year 614, the Persians scored this huge, decisive victory over the Romans. Now, history tells us this battle went down somewhere in the region of modern-day Jordan, right around the shores of the Dead Sea. Then, just a few years later, this verse appears, talking about the defeat and mentioning that very specific battlefield. And this is where things start to get really interesting. I mean, think about it. Why even bother mentioning a specific location? Why not just say, hey, the Romans lost? What is so special about this place, Adna al-Ard, that it needed to be included? That question has been a puzzle for a very, very long time. Now, here's the twist. The clue to solving this isn't buried in some archaeological dig or an old history book. No, the answer is actually hidden in plain sight, right inside the Arabic language itself.
So that phrase, Adna al-Ard, it comes from this root word dunu. And this is where it gets cool, because dunu has this amazing double meaning. It can mean something is near or close, but it can also mean that something is low or at a low elevation.
So this gives us two totally different ways to read the text. Is it saying the battle happened in the nearest land to Arabia, which, makes perfect sense for the time? Or is it saying it happened in the lowest land on the entire planet? For well over 1,000 years, everybody, translators, scholars, you name it, they all went with the first option. It was just logical. The battlefield was near Arabia, right there on the closest border with the Roman Empire. That second meaning, the lowest land, well, people figured it was probably just poetic language, a metaphor. After all, how on earth could anyone in the 7th century possibly know the literal lowest point of dry land on Earth?
And then, after centuries of this linguistic puzzle just sitting there, it was suddenly blown wide open. Not by a historian, but by modern technology. For 1,300 years, the nearest land was the only interpretation that made any sense at all. But then, in the 20th century, we developed satellites and GPS. We suddenly had the power to map our entire planet's surface with an accuracy that was just unimaginable before.
And when scientists pointed their incredibly precise instruments at that ancient battlefield near the Dead Sea, this is the number they got back. Negative 430 meters. That's more than 1,400 feet below sea level. It turns out the shoreline of the Dead Sea isn't just low. It is, scientifically, factually, the lowest point of exposed land on the entire planet. There is nowhere else on any continent that is lower than that spot, period. And just like that, that second meaning of Adna al-Ard, the one that was ignored for centuries, suddenly snapped into perfect, brilliant focus. The text wasn't just geographically correct from a 7th century perspective, it was also, astoundingly, 100% accurate from a 21st century satellite's perspective.
So, what do we do with this information, right? We have a 1,400-year-old text using a phrase with a perfect double meaning, and modern science comes along and confirms that both meanings are literally true for that exact location?
This discovery naturally sparks a huge debate. Is this just one of the most incredible, mind-bending coincidences in all of history? Or was this dual meaning put there on purpose, a kind of clue hidden in plain sight?
Let's break down the two main views. The skeptical argument is pretty straightforward. It says, look, the original author meant nearest land. That's what people back then would have understood. Trying to read lowest land into it now is just us, in the modern day, trying to make the text fit the science we just discovered. But the counterargument says, hang on, what if the word was chosen precisely because both meanings are true, making the statement incredibly profound?
And proponents of that counterargument bring up some really good points. First, using words with multiple layers of meaning is a well-known feature of the Quran's language. Second, the Roman Empire was gigantic. They had borders in Syria, Turkey, Egypt. They thought the Persians all over the place. So why mention the one battle that happened at the one spot on Earth that is also the absolute lowest point? The odds of that just being a lucky guess are, well, astronomical. Think of it like this. If the text had mentioned a Roman defeat near, say, Damascus, which is high up, about 700 meters above sea level, the phrase Adna al-Ard would still work as nearest land. But the lowest land meaning, it would be completely provably false. The power of the statement is that in this specific location, by the Dead Sea, and pretty much only this location, both meanings hold up to scrutiny. So let's bring this all together, because the takeaway from this is so simple and yet so profound. It's all about how one single word can paint two very different but equally accurate pictures of the world.
This right here really just captures the whole thing perfectly. For the people of the 7th century, Adna al-Ard described the world from their perspective, standing on the ground. For us, it describes the world from the perspective of global satellite data.
What we have here is a single phrase that acts as a correct geographical marker across 1,400 years of massive technological change. It was true for them, and it is absolutely true for us, but for two completely different sets of reasons.
And that leaves us right here with this one last question. Is this the most stunning linguistic and geological coincidence ever recorded in human history? Or is it something else? Evidence of knowledge that just shouldn't have been possible. A message, maybe, left for a future generation that would finally have the technology to understand its second, deeper meaning. That's something for you to decide.